the Zoom chat, or you can even unmute yourself as well. I was just thinking about, okay, Ustada Diana, please, you're raising your hand. We don't hear you, Ustada. No, unfortunately, we don't hear you.
Unmute.
If you could unmute. Unfortunately, we don't hear you, Ustada.
Maybe the microphone.
Maybe you can go offline and then enter the Zoom again. Maybe it will work then or something. Or maybe the sound configuration, if something there. So inshallah, while Ustada Diana is fixing her sound, inshallah, we're looking forward to listen to her. It's so interesting regarding contemplation, dear Dr. Bagos and Professor Skinner. I think that we subconsciously, even as Muslims, have internalized that meditation is kind of like the Western notion of it. It's very secularized. Actually, Dr. Fatima Abdullah, the wife of Professor Badri and one of the great scholars in the field, she speaks about spirituality. She compares a secular spirituality with Islamic spirituality. It was very interesting to listen to her. And I think that even meditation, because I actually have spoken with some even Buddhists, practicing Buddhists, who say that in West they have secularized or exotified our notions of meditation from the Buddhist tradition, which is very interesting. If you speak like with a practicing Buddhist, they will tell you that actually. And they say, he said to me, you should be glad as Muslims that they still haven't done it with the Islamic tradition. And we said, okay, alhamdulillah, at least that is something good, even though I'm sure it's not always because of the good of it, is because they don't know about it. Even though I think that contemplation is a great tool of da'wah. And as you say, Dr. Bagos, Professor Badri didn't write the book only for Muslims. He also writes to engage non-Muslims to understand Islam better and to do da'wah. And we should do that and introduce things to non-Muslims. With that said, the concept of contemplation is very holistic from the Islamic tradition. We have the thought process and the aql, but it's connected to so many other aspects. How do you think that we could perhaps in a very easy way convey the message of contemplation for a non-Muslim or even Muslims that don't know without making it too easy to grasp? Sometimes when we do it, when we try to be pedagogical, we tend to also water things down, if you understand what I'm saying. So the whole holistic aspect that Professor Badri speaks about. And actually, even there is a great scholar, I'm sure you guys know about him, dear excellent scholars, Maulana Tanvi. Dr. Amber Haq has translated some of his works from Urdu to English. And I wrote this quote when he speaks about tafakkur, which was amazing. So Maulana Tanvi, he says that finding peace should not be the objective because it's not in one's hand. However, if one change one's thinking and do good action, peace will follow. So the objective is to do the action and then the peace will follow. So I was just thinking from your thoughts and notions, how can we convey the message that Professor Badri explains so thoroughly and beautifully in his book in a way that we don't water it down, yet make it easy and accessible, both for Muslims and also for those who don't know about Islam but are interested. Please go ahead. And Ustada Diana, before I open up for the question to Professor Skinner and Dr. Bagos, do you want to say something?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you now.
Yeah, okay. Professor Skinner, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. And I just wondering, like, while you were trained in Western, and I don't know if maybe you live in Western forever, how was like your feeling to read Malik Badri's book, The Dilemma of Muslim Psychologists, for the first time? I mean, like, how that's challenge your mind, because they always say Western perspective. Well, maybe you had that Western perspective too, maybe. So that's, I just wondering about that. What differences between the West people and us in reading this book? Okay, and Also, the second question is, as I read your CV, you are expert in Jungian Jungian therapy. So how do you incorporate that with Islamic psychology? That's question from Basit Skinner. Thank you very much again for presenting in this conference. And for Pak Bagus, I always saw Prof. Malik Badri, Allah Yarham, bringing tasbih, and sometimes it is like under the table, like his hand was under the table when with the tasbih while teaching us, and always continuously moving the tasbih. I wonder, do you think it is the form or the behavior of contemplation that we can see action like that? What do you think? Yeah, it's just my.
This would be a lecture in itself. Thank you very much. There's a very questions. And I want Vegas to come in as well. It is lovely to see you, Vegas. It really is. I would say Vegas was a wonderful host for me when I was visiting Yogyakarta, and I never forget it. So as much as I dislike the new technology, there are some advantages, and being able to see Vegas and, well, get your question, sister, is one of the benefits. First of all, I was very fortunate in my psychological education. I had a wonderful professor of psychology as an undergraduate. I studied anthropology as well. We were always taught that psychology was culturally relative. This was a strong point of his. He was he was critical of Freud. He was critical of the behavioralists. He was a close friend of G.W. Allport, who was one of the people that Malik refers to as having a compatibility with Islamic psychology. In fact, my professor, rather awkwardly in an English way, because he had Allport's academic hat, his doctoral hat, which was sent to him when he died, he placed it on my head, almost like to sort of convey the barakat of Allport. So I had compared to now, a much more liberal education in Western psychology, and an understanding from the beginning that it was culturally based. Then I had my own experiences as a Muslim, and I was searching, which was a conflict, certainly with Freud, but even with behavioralism, I wasn't satisfied. So I was searching, and I didn't speak Arabic. I hadn't been a Muslim long. I formally converted in '76, but I had good scholars I knew. I was going to, what does Al-Ghazali mean by this? The big impact of Malik's book was that it articulated everything. So I'm feeling my way. I know no other Muslim psychologists. There weren't many in the UK at that time. I'm trying to do things for myself. And even the concept of an Islamic psychology wasn't in my head. I read Malik and it all comes together. It's like there's somebody else out there. In fact, there's a movement out there that thinks the same way as I do. And, everything, as I said in the book, is so clear. It's like the blueprint of everything. You can read it and yes, that's it. And I can now see the way forward. So, that perhaps answers the first question. The second one, we can come on to discussion with Vegas. I think this issue of the Buddhist intrusion into psychology is indeed Muslim psychology is as important as or to be guarded about it and to understand it, to be nuanced about it, as important as it is about the psychology that's coming from the West. And essentially, I think if we were, the risk of Buddhist and some Hindu meditation is it's mind upon mind. And it can actually produce, it's like a self-hypnosis. It can produce a detachment from the heart. And that's why sometimes you see in Buddhist cultures, like in, what happened in Japanese prisoner of war camps, and you know what it was like in Indonesia, Vegas, and Malaysia, and it produced almost a psychopathic culture because there's no heart. So we've got to be very cautious of this. And all forms of Islamic contemplation, in my view, start with the attachment to the qalb, to the heart. Al-Ghazali speaks about 5 levels of aql, and the 5th of these is centered in the heart. That's what we start with. So the heart guides our contemplation. Our heart is guiding our cognition. That is safe. So if we, at the end of the day, are contemplating the things that we've done wrong, what we've done wrong, what's right in the day, if we just use our mind on that, it's like psychoanalysis. You end up in, or the risk is you end up in an illusion. If you start with that zikr and you go into your heart and then open your cognition, you open your thinking to how the heart is guiding you, the heart knows what is real, and that will guide you to the truth. So this, for me, is the essence between an Islamic and indeed most Christian forms of contemplation and the Buddhist one. And if we're to present this to a Western audience, if you like, or a non-Muslim audience, this is the important difference. I'm not saying you can't use clinically sometimes things like mindfulness, or indeed, for that matter, hypnosis, but you would use it, I think, in the way that Ibn Sina says a physician can use a poison. You have to know it's for a particular purpose, and you have to know the dose. And I think Muslims are floundering with this. It's something I hope Rania Wadi and others will be producing a paper on shortly. And the last question about Jung, Jung is in some ways has the vocabulary which you can enable you to use an Islamic approach to psychology with a non-Muslim. He has that idea that inside the self there is something that draws us back to completion. It's a source of true guidance, as in a special type of dream. And Jung calls it the self, which is not very meaningful actually in English, but in his sense, he's describing a sense of fitra, that which connects us back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The big theological issue with Jung is that he understands these internal psychological processes, of course, completely different from Freud. He's not the rational materialist at all. So he understands this sort of spiritual process within the self, that the object of therapy is to open the person to that. In the same way as Islamic psychotherapy, I think we want to open the person to the heart, to their own sense of fitra, so they have their own guidance as to what's right to them. The issue is, at the end of the day, does Jung take a sort of Buddhist view of this, that, like everything is contained within the self, but you don't need to invoke the assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that process? Or does he take an Ali Khattab view, a Christian, Buddhist, Jewish view, that we actively need to seek the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with everything we do? And that is unclear with Jung. I think for practical purposes, you don't need to go into that. Just if you're dealing with a non-Muslim, you want to analyze a dream, you want to get the person back to feeling from their fitra what is right for them, you can use Jung's vocabulary. So in that way, he's useful. And some way I think of it as being this: let's say you've got an electric car and it goes wrong. Jung understands the engine very, very well, all the different bits of it, and he can put it right. what is unclear is whether Jung understands that the battery needs charging from outside or whether he doesn't. Whether he thinks it's all self-contained, but we know it isn't. That at some point that electricity needs to get into the battery. And occasionally this will make a vital difference if it's your battery that's gone wrong. Other things you can use Jung. So that's the best answer I think I can give. Has that been understandable? Because you've asked some deep questions, sister.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much for a wonderful explanation about the battery, the engine, and also how the book show you the blueprint. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Now, I'd like to hear what Vegas has to say, particularly on this issue of how we would present almost market Islamic contemplation into the non-Muslim world. And how do we distinguish it from Buddhist? I mean, I think you're right. What we have in mindfulness in the West and hippie meditation is not, has been detached from Buddhism as a religion. And we do need to be aware of marketing bits of Islam in a way that also detaches it from the essence. But I do think there is still a fundamental difference between Buddhist meditation and yoga and all these things and an Islamic understanding of the self and what a good Islamic contemplation practices.
Barakallahu fikum, jazakallah khairan. Sister Diana Ustada Diana for a great question and Professor Skinner for a great response. MashaAllah. Dr. Bagus, your thoughts regarding Ustada Diana's question?
Okay. First of all, Professor Malik Badri also wrote in his book, Contemplation book, that the body and the soul should be connected, should be coherent. So you cannot judge the people's heart only from the activity of the body, but if the one who do that is Professor Malik Badri, I believe that what he did is actually a dhikr in a real meaning. But some other individual maybe who doesn't have this deep understanding, maybe when they do that, it's not guaranteed that they really do the dhikr, a deep dhikr activities, because it has to be from your heart. It's not only in your hand or in your mouth, but it has to be from your heart. And your mouth and your hands is only a reflection of the activity of the heart. So it has to start from the heart. So we cannot judge or tell whether a person who do that is correct or not. But if the one who has the heart that always remember Allah, maybe their behavior will act according to it. So I think this is very important, because there are some examples how the appearance disguise or fools you. Like it looks like he's very pious person, but actually his heart is not there. So that's a very we have to be very aware and be careful about that. So we don't judge. Actually, we shouldn't judge people only from their behavior, but we should understand. We should have we first of all we have to start from ourselves. If we see people do that, we should have this positive attitude, and we should understand that we should apply to ourselves that doing those things is good as long as our heart is there. So this is very important, I think. Thank you.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Bagus. Great response. And I totally agree with you that we should start with ourselves before pointing fingers towards others. And that is the concept of jihad al-nafs. So that's beautiful put. And thank you, Ustada Diana, for your great questions. And thank you, Professor Skinner. We will open up now for the participants to ask questions. So if you would like to ask a direct question, feel free to raise your hand. If you want to write the question, feel free to write to the Q&A admin handle in the Zoom chat, inshallah. So we'll start with one question from Misbah Rafiq. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
First of all, I want to thank the speakers for this wonderful lectures. And my question is specifically about contemplation. If we use contemplation as a technique in Islamic counseling, but just if not considering the non-believers, but only the Muslims, the Islamic counseling meant for the Muslims, and we're using contemplation as a technique. So how can we cater to the diversity within the Muslims, within the Muslim population? Because there is, although Quran exhorts to contemplate, it says, "Afala yanzuruna ila al-ibli," or it says, "Inna fi ikhlaqi layli wan nahar la ayatin li ulil albab." It does give that idea that we have to be contemplative in general, but unfortunately, in the general population, in the masses, we don't find that nature. So my question is, how can we address to the diversity of the Muslim population coming for Islamic counseling if we are aiming to use contemplation as a technique to get closer to Allah or to develop that connection with Allah? Thank you.
Jazakallah khairan, Sister Misbah. So Professor Skinner, feel free to respond to the question, please.
I didn't hear the question perfectly. I think it's how do we address the issue of contemplation with a diverse Muslim population? Was that the question?
Yes,
and referring to different aqidas, different
not more than Professor, it's more than aqidas. It's about the nature, the diversity of the individual differences in the personalities of the people.
Right.
Some people consider it, So how in Muslim population, although being the readers of the Quran or to whom the Quran is addressed, it does want us to contemplate over the creation, but largely we don't find that in the population. So if you're using that as a technique in Islamic counseling, but we don't find people receptive enough or equipped enough to carry out contemplation. So in this situation, what should we do?
This is a very rich question. First of all, I think we accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made people with different constitutions. Again, it's something sort of Jung touches on. Say Allah has made it in different ummahs, but this is interpreted particularly in traditional Islamic medicine. It's referring to the different constitutional types of people. The four major ones: the phlegmatic, the sanguine, the melancholic, forget the other one for now. So in what we do in Islamic psychotherapy, we start with this understanding that people are going to be of different types and have different constitutions. So what approach will suit one person will not necessarily suit another person. So that's one thing. Secondly, we have to be cautious about using contemplation as a technique in the same way as you might use mindfulness. If you understand mindfulness as minder from mind, it's almost like a self-hypnosis. You can use this as a technique if you're, as I said about, as Ibn Sina said, in a very careful, knowledgeable way. For instance, if somebody is hearing unpleasant voices in their head and there's no other treatment that is going to particularly work from that, you might use mindfulness to specifically control that voice. When you've done it, you stop it. You don't go over that limit, because if you stay in this mindfulness state, you're actually blocked off from the heart. So, but you can use these sort of techniques, I think, for specific clinical purposes. I wouldn't use Islamic contemplation in the same way. I wouldn't say, you know, to you know, every time you want to get rid of anxiety, you say zikr. For instance, if you count zikr as a form of contemplation, what I would be doing is saying, in general, you need to bring people, whatever their problem, back to an access to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and contemplation, whether it's that sitting down, being quiet, starting with the zikr, which is purely in the heart, if you like, and then going into allowing that state of heartfulness to guide your thinking about, for instance, what is the source of my problem, or what should my approach be to getting anxious in a public place, or something like that. That's different. So you're generally trying to get people back into a state of closeness to their fitra, in effect, which then guides them in a way that is particular to them. And now, coming back to say, what do you do with, you know, you can't get people to engage with it, or there's different types of people and different akidas even maybe. You can, I think Bega said, our hearts and our minds and our body are all connected. So I sometimes recommend the Sunnah sports, because the archery, the riding, and the horse riding, the swimming in particular, have virtues to them. And particularly with archery, to do it well, you need to be in a state of zikr. So you go into that state of the heart, and that then guides your mental concentration and your physical performance. So like a zikr in the body. And this is particularly useful for some people. Or saying to people when you're walking, to walk in a state of zikr. You know, just to get used to that sort of the zikr pervading your whole self. And from that state, it's easier to deal with particular problems. And you can, I suppose, be a bit specific. If, let's say, somebody has an agoraphobia, let's say, you can deal with it cognitively, but you can also say, look, when you're out, if you go into that state of heart, the heart is at a different level to the forces in the whole. I mean, the nafs in that sense, a different level to your anxiety and your fears and, you know, depressive thoughts or whatever it is. You're at a different level of the self. So whatever the problem is, if you can access that, then you're no longer overwhelmed by whatever it is that is overwhelming you from a lower level of yourself. I'm not sure if any of that answers your question, sister, because it's quite a profound question.
Jazakallah khairan, Professor Skinner.
Thank you very much. It was very, very enriching indeed. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Jazakallah khairan, Professor. Thank you also, sister, for a great question. Indeed, it's very important to know as a clinician how to apply these Islamic concepts. And thank you, Professor Skinner, for a thorough explanation. We cannot take it too light. We need to really thoroughly, examine the concepts, and also, as you say, Professor Skinner, root ourselves in it. And even seen as, saying that you're quoting is so beautiful. That even the doctor needs to know the dosage. When you're using that, it's so important. And it's not always easy to know the dosage. I mean, all the tasawwuf scholars, they trained for 20-30 years to understand sometime which type of treatment they could give to their disciples, right? So I mean, this is nothing that we can just do after one session of listening or reading a book. So definitely and I guess also, Professor Skinner, in West, they do manuals all the time. So read this 5 steps and then you can do it. Like there is not this concept of ijaza in the same way. Of course they have ijaza, we should not say that. I mean, you get licensed, but it's still not as thoroughly like we have in our tradition, when you follow somebody for years, to understand the master's way of working with this issue. So barakallahu fikum. We have a lot of questions now, so we will take one question from the chat. And before we invite Dr. Rania will soon have the lecture, I just want to mention to all of our participants, some of our writing to us. Dr. Hanan Dower was supposed to have a lecture today, and she sends her regards. She was not able to do it due to different circumstances, but she sends her regards. I know a lot of you wanted to listen to Dear Ustada Hanan Dower. I also want to ask you, Professor, regarding the 2 causations of Islamic psychology and what differentiates that with general psychology. This is something you do a lot of lectures about, so it will be very wonderful to listen to that. But we'll take that question before Dr. Rania joins us. Before that, we'll invite our participants. So dear volunteers of this session, our excellent volunteers, could you please share a question from our dear participants? Barakallahu fikum, excellent volunteers. So the question is, I would like to ask the recommended order by the scholars of reading them. I think is, okay, I understand the question. So the question is about some of Professor Bedri's book, as I understand. If we want to read them as seekers of knowledge and students, where should we start? Which book will be the first book to read? Professor Skinner, Dr. Bagos, whoever wants to address the question.
Dr. Bagos.
Well, I would suggest that the first book you should read is The Dilemma of Muslim Psychologists, I think, because it is the seed of these ideas. And then when you read the contemplation, after reading the Dilemma of Muslim Psychologists, you already have this perspective of the critical thinking and also the root of Islamic belief system and stuff like that. So I would recommend you to first read and understand the message from the book, The Dilemma of Muslim Psychologists.
Barakallahu fikum, Dr. Bagos.
I absolutely agree with Bagos. I thought I would. Possibly a third, which I particularly like. So after the first 2, he wrote a book called Cyber Counseling, which is really a lot of case studies. I mean, personally, I don't like cyber counseling, actually. I think you miss something if you're not face-to-face. But the case studies are very interesting, including the importance of getting the fiqh right with people. The fiqh also has to reflect the fitra, and sometimes people's understanding of Islam doesn't. So in that order, the dilemma, contemplations, and then to see how almost it's put into practice, cyber counseling. There might be a better one than that, but that's the one I've read, and I found it very useful as a sort of practical demonstration of how you put these things into practice in therapy.
Barakallahu fikum, Professor Skinner, and Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Bagos. Dr. Hanan Dower, we're supposed to actually reflect and do a review about that book, Professor Skinner. So that, inshallah, we will try to share some links. I know that there's been some YouTube clips regarding some reviews of the particular book you were mentioning. So definitely it's a interesting and very important topic, specifically in the pandemic times, right? Because there is a lot of cyber counseling going on, even though maybe somebody doesn't want to do it. We need to do it out of necessity.
Yeah.
Also, yesterday, I think that Professor Kasule spoke about Professor Bedri's last book, which was about the psychology of the prophets, which is written in Arabic. Yeah. But I know that there is a translation work going on. So I know a lot of people are recommending that book as well. So barakallahu fikum, dear excellent scholar. So let's go to the second question in the chat. And then there is a couple of hands raised that we will also, inshallah, invite to ask their questions. All right, the question is, many Muslims doing rituals, but not many do Islamic rituals until the level of contemplation. How could we make it more popular for Muslims to do contemplation? What do you think, Professor Skinner or Dr. Bagus?
Oh, yeah, this is... needs thinking about this. It's quite a deep question.
We need to do collaborative tafakkur.
Yes, indeed. Well, one thing is to understand. I mentioned the importance of the Sunnah sports. One thing is to understand how contemplation comes into everyday life, as it were. So it integrates everything in the self together, and Islam is an embodied religion. You can, we pray in a certain way, we have dietary rules and so on. The way our body functions is also influences our psychology, and it's influences our heart, and vice versa. So one thing is to encourage people to do the sort of sports, and there are things that are close to it. Bagus, you know Salat, the Islamic martial arts that you find in your part of the world. And I've had a patient who plays cricket who describes being said, wasn't her words, but because she didn't have the vocabulary, but what she was saying was, when I'm in a state of zikr, I bowl middle stump every time. And this, seemed to be an absolute reflection of what Ibn Arabi said about doing archery, that when you really do archery from a state of zikr, then you hit the target every time. So I think this area is a bit neglected because as psychologists, we don't think about the body so much, but particularly for some people to say, you bring the contemplation, you start always with the heart, whatever you're doing, whether it's the purely cognitive meditation, whether it's the sort of the cognition that goes into a physical activity like archery. You start with this, and then one form of this is going to be, the archery, the riding, Salat, maybe even playing soccer in a particular way. So whatever you're doing, you're getting used to your whole self being moved by the zikr. So that's just one thing. I think actually if you watch Muhammad Ali box as well, you recognize his feet are moving quicker than the neurology could produce by itself. In other words, he's moving quicker than having the thought that translates to the nerves that moves the feet or the fists. And I've watched people do Salat and felt the same thing. The movement is guided by the zikr. It's guided by the contemplation. So that's one bit of your answer, I think, that we widen our understanding of what we mean by contemplation. We always, whatever it is, Islamically, it has to start with the heart, and that distinguishes it from Buddhist and some types of Hindu meditation. Starting with that, we can extend that contemplation into a wide area of daily activity.
Barakallahu fikum, Professor Skinner. Such an excellent answer, really. Thank you. Gave us a lot of
Yeah,
new
the
insights.
answer. This is a deep question. Maybe Begas would like to add to it.
Yeah, Dr. Vargas, would you like to add to what Professor Skinner said?
This is a very important question. It's a very significant question, and it is actually the core of being a Muslim, because if we do ritual without contemplation, then we cannot predict what could happen to this person, because maybe he doesn't understand what he's doing. Okay, so doing contemplation actually is how to consciously in that moment of this ritual, and that ritual should reflect the consciousness of the heart of the existence of Allah. Like the word ihsan means that we always remember, we are always aware that there's Allah there, and it will make our behavior, our ritual, it's really healing. Like, you know, we will feel this peace in our heart. And if you ask about how to how to get into that state, then we need practice. So in terms of practice, I agree with Professor Skinner that the body and the mind is actually two in one. You cannot separate them. You cannot just do something with your body without any consciousness, that it won't be effective, and it won't be healthy. But also when you only have the cognitive activities, but your body is doing nothing, then you will be going everywhere. Like you will, you will lose your concentration. That's why in Salat we use our body and our mind and our heart in the same time to concentrate. But it needs some effort to do that, especially the mind, because the body is easier to control, but the mind, sometimes when you do Salat, your mind is everywhere. You're going here and there. It's not concentrating. So the steps, I think, this is also hadith by Rasulullah. But when you say the prayer, you should understand the meaning. So by understanding the meaning, then you will increase your concentration, and also your heart will be there. But still, even though you understand the meaning, sometimes there's some, what do you call it, this disruption, because your mind is very easy to go anywhere. Even though you're saying, for example, you're saying Al-Fatihah, but that your mind is going to something that you will do next, something that you did yesterday. So it's not easy. It's not easy, but there are steps to do that. And you can do also, beside disciplining your body, you can do reciting Quran over and over until you can feel the message. Like you understand the meaning, you hear the sound, and you pronounce it, you recite it until it really flows from your mouth, and then it will increase your contemplation. And once you understand the meaning of what you're saying, then when you do the ritual like Salat, you will be more connected, because I'm praying about this, or now I'm I'm saying I'm witnessing this, and things like that. Okay, so there are some techniques to increase your concentration, but you have to be aware that it's not an easy step. It's not an easy thing to do. You have to yeah, that's why we need the word jihad to nafs, like brother Jamaluddin always said. Yeah, you need to do jihad. Jihad means you do it seriously, you do it intentionally, with the effort, something like that. Okay, I think that's what I can say right now. Thank you.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah, Jazakallah khairan. Great answer, MashaAllah. So many great insights from both of your reflections, dear Dr. Bagus and Professor Skinner. Thank you so much. We're so honored to have such excellent teachers and scholars with us for us as seekers to know more. Dear excellent participants, I see that we have 3 hands raised. We would love to address those questions, but now we are actually moving on to the next section of the lecture, or sorry, of the conference today. Inshallah, if we will have time in the end of the conference, we will, inshallah, address your questions as well. And please forgive us for any shortcomings. We had a good amount of time now to at least answer 5-6 questions, which was amazing. So barakallah fikum. And feel free to write your questions in the Q&A to the Q&A handle and the Zoom chat as well. So we try to address them. So jazakallah khairan once more to Professor Skinner and Dr. Bagus, and we hope that you guys are with us, dear scholars, after Dr. Rani's presentation, and then we perhaps can open up for a couple of questions more. So without any further ado, let me now present next person that will have a lecture or have a presentation for us. This is Dr. Rania Wad. Dr. Rania Wad